And welcome to episode 29 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hennig. This week on the podcast, talk about why Mike McCarthy was fired and what the future is for the Green Bay Packers, my reaction to the latest Captain Marvel trailer that came out on Monday Night Football's Eagles-Redskins game, along with perspective on Markelle Fultz's latest diagnosis, the latest news on the Venom movie breaking more box office records, and what is Urban Meyer's legacy after retiring at Ohio State. So let's open up a cold one for this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Topic number one on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. After NFL Week 13, the Green Bay Packers decided to fire their longtime head coach Mike McCarthy after 13 seasons. A lot of people want to focus on the fact that McCarthy won them a Super Bowl, that he was a respected coach around the league. Aaron Rodgers passively defended his coach, saying that him and McCarthy had a good relationship. But all of this overlooks the reason why McCarthy was fired and why it was important for the Packers to do this now rather than later. And it gets down to a couple things. After the 2011 season, in 2011 the Packers went 15-1. Since then, the Packers were 62, 44-2 from 2012 to 2018. So you're talking about a team that is not even 20 games over 500 over the last several seasons. And in fact, over the last 4 seasons, they've only won 31 games. So they're not even averaging 8 wins per season over the last 4 years. And then over the last 7 seasons, they're not even averaging 9 wins a season. So you have an organization that won a Super Bowl, had a phenomenal year the next season, and has been on a downward descend since then. Furthermore, from 2015 through 2018, over the last 4 seasons, the team is only averaging 23.4 points per game. Now, I understand that Aaron Rodgers has missed some time over the last few years. I also understand that this team has not always been 100% healthy on the defensive side of the ball. Mike McCarthy, supposed to be an offensive-minded head coach, was not elevating the offense anymore. He kept Don Capers around way too long. The guy should have been let go years ago. The defense was underwhelming for years. In fact, statistically, the Packers were among the bottom half of the league in almost every category over the last 4 years. And since they won the Super Bowl after the 2010 season, from 2011 till now, they've only had a top 5 defense twice over that time. And they've only been top 10 3 times. So you're talking about a franchise that wasn't getting the job done offensively, was having struggles defensively, had already had a shuffle at the top of the pyramid of the power structure when they got rid of the past general manager. They brought in a new GM. Mark Murphy had already changed the entire power structure of the franchise. So we shouldn't be surprised McCarthy was fired. And furthermore, firing him now does 2 things. 1, it allows the Packers to get a jump start on the head coaching search. And 2, it allows McCarthy to get a jump start on his coaching future. Because at the end of the day, whether you like Mike McCarthy or not, the truth is that this guy has to get another coaching job at some point. He's going to be like Andy Reid was several years ago. Andy Reid, his time came to an end in Philadelphia. He lost all of his assistants. He was less of an effective head coach. He had to go. But the Kansas City Chiefs said, we're not going to let you pass us by. We're going to go out and get you. So they brought in Andy Reid. Kansas City's had a rejuvenation of playoff appearances and success. I think McCarthy will have the same thing. And whether it's the Browns, whether it's the Bucks, whether it's the Jets, I believe one of those organizations will probably end up with Mike McCarthy after this season. Now, what the future of the Green Bay Packers is a twofold issue. One is you got to bring in a head coach that is not just going to change the culture and the environment in Green Bay, but you also need a head coach is someone who Aaron Rodgers is going to respect, whether that's Josh McDaniels, whether that's John DeFilippo. We know that it has to be someone of that type of pedigree. Now, one of the problems with the Packers is that the market for head coaches is in flux right now because Ryan Day just got locked up at Ohio State. Ryan Day was going to be a candidate for some NFL jobs. Cliff Kingsbury just became the offensive coordinator at University of Southern California. So you have two high-level prospects from the college ranks out of the running for the NFL now. And you're not going to bring in some young, hip, hotshot coordinator because Rodgers isn't going to respect him and they may not mesh. And not everyone's offense is going to match what Aaron Rodgers wants to do, what he does best. You can't fit a square peg into a round hole. So the Packers have some tough decisions on their hands. I do think that Josh McDaniels is the prime candidate for that job. I think DeFilippo will be considered as well. Also, I'll give you a guy from college who could be part of the running as well. Matt Campbell from Iowa State. He's a guy, he's a program builder. He's not someone who demands to be a part of the offense or the defensive game planning intricately. He's a guy who is more so lets his coordinators do what they do, and he manages the game as a whole. Maybe you bring in a guy like him, and you give Rodgers an offensive coordinator that he gets along with, whether that's a Joe Philbin, whether that's bringing back an Alex Van Pelt, who was his quarterback coach, maybe someone else that he has worked with in the past, or someone that people know that he respects. Bring that coordinator in and let that guy call the offensive plays. Let Matt Campbell manage the team. And Campbell, formerly the head coach at Tulane, has spent the last couple of years at Iowa State. 2 straight college football programs he has turned around in a short amount of time. Green Bay is a smaller arena in terms of city size, media size. You're not dealing with the same type of media and attention that you're going to get from television and radio and digital that you would get in the bigger cities like the Philadelphias, the New Yorks, the Los Angeles, and Chicago. Green Bay, the environment is much closer to a college environment, so the transition for a college coach would not be as extreme. Mike McCarthy was like sour milk. He had passed his expiration date in Green Bay, and they were hanging on to him because he had that Super Bowl championship. But like anybody, you have to move on after a certain point. You cannot just stay at a high-profile job like that forever if you're not having a certain level of success. One of the reasons why Belichick has lasted as long as he has because he has held a level of consistency, stability, and winning that is unparalleled in the NFL today. In a league full of parity, the Patriots are anti the league's parity. They're constantly winning. They're constantly having opportunities to win championships. When Aaron Rodgers won that Super Bowl, when he was raising up the trophy and the WWE belt, we all thought he was going to win a bunch of these rings. He never got back. And in many ways, you could say that Mike McCarthy ended up turning into what Don Shula and Andy Reid were at the end of their tenures. Don Shula was literally just hanging around because of his name and his reputation. Meanwhile, Andy Reid was hanging around in Philadelphia because he, at that point, was the best coach the franchise had ever had in their franchise history. He had the most wins and the most success. He was the best they ever had, and it was hard for them to move on. So McCarthy ended up in the same boat. He was hanging around because of his name and his reputation, and he was, at that point in time, the best head coach they had had since Mike Holmgren. So it was hard for the franchise to cut the cord, but as soon as they got rid of Ted Thompson and they brought in Brian Gunthurst to be the GM, it made it easier to move on. And sometimes you have to cut the cord early to get a jump. And the Packers are seeing now with Cliff Kingsbury and Ryan Day already off the potential market, their list of candidates is going to start shrinking more and more because the qualifications of the type of person they need to get a certain type of coach, not just to coach Rodgers, but to change the mentality and the culture and the environment of an organization that has become complacent. And complacency is like cancer. It just rots away at the culture, just like cancer rots and destroys the human body. Topic number 2 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. At halftime of the Eagles-Redskins game, the debut of the second Captain Marvel trailer. Captain Marvel will be coming out in March of 2019. This is the bridge movie that will lead into the Avengers 4 movie, which is expected to be the final stanza of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's characters like Tony Stark, Captain America, Thor, and others. They're run as Avengers. And Captain Marvel was already explained before any of these trailers ever came out by Kevin Feige, the head of Marvel Cinematic Universe, that Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel is going to be the most powerful character they've ever introduced into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And in the second trailer, we got to see a little bit more of that power on display. In the trailer, it gets a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of what we're going to see in this movie, which is, and for those who don't want to know spoilers, spoiler alert, but I'm going to give you some information right now based on the trailers and based on a little bit of comic book history. Basically, it looks like at some point in time, Carol Danvers, while she is a fighter pilot for the United States Air Force, she crash lands as a result of getting in between some sort of Kree-Skrull conflict on Earth. And as a result, she is approached by either a Kree or a Skrull. It's a little bit ambiguous about what the truth is with that right now, part of that scene, because of the fact that, again, we see it looks like people are manipulating her memories and messing with her mind and her genetics. So we don't know exactly how many of these flashback scenes when it comes to her meeting Kree, her meeting Skrull, is real versus manipulated. But we do know that she becomes part of the Star Force of Kree warriors that travel around as a part of the Kree-Skrull conflict. They go around and they claim themselves to be heroes. And it is her, it's Korath the Pursuer, it's Von Rogg, it's a few others who are famous and infamous in Marvel Comics for various reasons. And she's a part of that group. Now, it looks like the Kree, in their modification of her DNA, have depowered her a little bit, probably to kind of just keep her in check, not to let her powers get out of control. It seems like at some point later, she is captured by Skrulls and is confronted by the leader of the Skrulls, at least the leader in this movie. And it appears that the Kree have been lying to her about her origin, about who she is. So when she crash lands on Earth, she's still working under what she thought was true from her time as working with the Kree. In her learning about the truth, she decides, as she says in the trailer, that she's going to end the Kree-Skrull war altogether. And that's at the end when you get a glimpse at her in her binary form. Now, the binary form is a big deal in comics as well as this movie, because when Kevin Feige was explaining Captain Marvel being the most powerful, when you're looking at the most powerful characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, people like Thor, people like Thanos, their power isn't purely just coming from them. Thanos is getting power from the Infinity Stones. It enhances his abilities. Thor gets more power from Mjolnir. Later, he has the new axe constructed for him that can access portals and basically enhances his powers as Thor, the God of Thunder. So their powers are not purely part of them. It's from something else. And originally in the comics, Carol Danvers' ability to tap into basically a white hole in the universe of energy and power and become binary was originally one of Marvel's MacGuffins. It was originally a plot device that basically didn't need any explanation. It was just kind of put in there to fix whatever problem was there. So, you know, sometimes Franklin Richards, the Fantastic Four, Sue and Reed's son in the comics, he's used as a MacGuffin. Carol Danvers at times is used as a MacGuffin. There's different characters that in comics get used as a MacGuffin. But Carol Danvers, her having this power is is something that's very different than the typical MacGuffin, because it's not just, oh, you're super powerful, you can go in there and save the day. Introducing Carol Danvers and having a explanation and a source and a reason for her to go binary and have this power makes it much more believable and much cooler, because one of the things that makes Carol Danvers unique is that her character is not the result of someone or something else, right? So in Avengers 2, Wanda Maximoff and her brother Quicksilver, they get some of their powers from the experiments of Hydra. Now in the comics, they are the twin children of Magneto. Their existence is kind of linchpinned to someone or something else. Black Panther has the vibranium. Iron Man has his intelligence. Captain America is basically a science experiment. Thor is from Asgard. He's the son of Odin. Captain Marvel is a character that is able to stand more on her own 2 feet. She is a hero because she chooses to be. You get to see that a little bit in the trailer. That's something that happens in the comics. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch that on the big screen. Because before this, Wonder Woman was great, not just because it was a woman who stood on her own 2 feet and could do what she did, and her powers were within reason and logical, and you could kind of, make some sort of tangible sense to it. Carol Danvers' ability to fly the Quinjet in the trailer isn't because she's just so smart. No, it's because she used to be a pilot. There's an explanation behind all these different levels. So when you look at the trailer, you're realizing that Marvel is saying, look, we're giving you this super-powered character, but we're not going to turn her into this Mr. Fix-It character. We're not going to turn her into this character that comes in and fixes whatever problem there is. There's some other tangible aspects to her character, to her powers, to her abilities. There's a history there. There's a deeper story there. And also, by putting this in the 1990s, it allows you to use an era of the Marvel history that has been untapped yet. It was a lot of fun to see this trailer. I liked the fact that we got to see a little bit more details. We saw Ronan in the trailer. We know he has a role in all this. It looks like Von Rogg is basically one of the antagonists in this movie. We see a younger Nick Fury, him kind of learning as he goes along about what the deal is with the Kree and the Skrull. And I think one of the reasons why that the character Captain Marvel goes away, it seems, is because after she deals with the Kree-Skrull war and defending Earth, it seems the reason why she leaves Earth is because she travels around the universe to deal with the Kree-Skrull war in different quadrants of the universe as a whole. And who knows, maybe she was behind the peace agreement between the Kree and Xandar that we saw in the 2014 Guardians of the Galaxy movie. So maybe Carol Danvers has kind of been working behind the scenes. And how does Thanos incorporate into this? Well, maybe there's a point in the movie where Thanos becomes aware of Captain Marvel, or she becomes aware of him. And maybe that has something to do with the fact of why Fury calls Carol Danvers, not just because of the fact that, it's a doomsday scenario, you call Captain Marvel. Well, maybe it's also because Captain Marvel maybe warns Fury about something that's coming. And when Fury sees what's happening around him, he realizes that maybe Danvers told him about this before. So we'll have to see how the movie progresses and how it ends. And we know that Captain Marvel will also be in Avengers 4, and she's going to be a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the post-incarnation of the aftermath of Avengers 4. So it's very exciting to see this trailer. I think it's going to be a great movie. And I think it's going to be an important movie because this is an opportunity for Marvel to really retool the Avengers. Because once Avengers 4 is done, you're going to have a new Avengers team. And that team is probably going to be comprised of Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Ant-Man, and the Wasp. And they'll probably throw one other person in there, a seventh person, just for good measure, whoever that character may be. but it'll be a new team of Avengers and a new dynamic of personalities and characters that get along with each other. Now, we don't know for sure that Thor is done. We expect that after Avengers 4 that Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans' characters will be done portraying those characters. Again, that's the expectation. We have not been confirmed anything per se yet, but it looks like Captain Marvel's introduction does more than just bring her into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, does more than create a bigger and larger history for different future events, but also sets the stage for her to be a part of the long-term future of the MCU as well. Topic number 3 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Tuesday, the news came out that Markelle Fultz has been diagnosed with thoracic outlet syndrome, also known as TOS. And while this is an injury that does not typically affect basketball players, it's well known for baseball players. Pitchers like Chris Carpenter, Jaime Garcia, Josh Beckett. There's a long list of pitchers who have suffered the TOS issue. This is a neurological issue. This is not like the typical orthopedic injury where you tear your ACL, dislocated rotator cuff. This has to do with the neurological system. And it appears that Fultz will not need surgery for this. All he has to do is go through some extensive physical therapy, and they're hoping within 3 to 6 weeks of rehab, he's going to be okay. Now, I'm not going to get into here the deep particulars of this condition. I want to more focus on why we've come to this situation. I remember when I was 16 and I woke up and I was in excruciating pain. I didn't understand why. And when I was later diagnosed with a pinched sciatic nerve and an issue in the sciatica in my lower back, I was very apprehensive, to be honest with people, and be open about it because I honestly didn't know what to think. Sometimes you're scared of what you don't understand. You're dismissive of what doesn't make sense. And as I've gotten older, I've become much more open to learning. I've become more open to obtaining knowledge. I've become much more open to understanding health and all kinds of different things. It's one of the reasons why, for a while there, I was a certified personal trainer and nutritionist because people told me, because I had made such great leaps with my own health and improving my own physical condition that I could help others. And I did for a little while. And it all started from that 16-year-old kid who wouldn't tell people, but I was scared. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know why I had this pain shooting down my leg. I didn't want to admit to coaches. I was hesitant to tell my parents. I was hesitant to tell my teammates because to me, I felt like if I admit this weakness, I admit this shortcoming, that people aren't going to understand, or I'm letting people down, or something along those lines. And I can only imagine the level for Markelle Fultz. You're a 19-year-old kid. You turn 20. You're the first pick in the NBA draft. You have the 76ers trade up to get you. The Sixers were at 3rd overall. They trade up to number 1 with Boston to pick you up. You have this debut in the Summer League. You look good. Everyone's excited to have you on the team. And then 2 months pass by, and you're not even the same player anymore. Part of his game in college was built around the fact that he could hit threes, that he basically was a pick and roll type player who could either shoot the 3-point shot, shoot from the outside, or take it to the basket. He was looked at in college because of his skill set as this hybrid, basically, of it was almost as if, like, watching him, if someone had taken Dwayne Wade and Baron Davis and kind of like merged them together, that was kind of the player you were getting a Markelle Fultz, except a little bit better shooter. And, maybe a little bit of Klay Thompson mixed in there athletically as a defender. So there were these high expectations on him. And then we don't know how he injured his shoulder. There's been speculation it was a motorcycle accident. There's been speculation that he had a shooting coach that was trying to change his shot, and they were having him do these weird techniques like sitting in a chair, laying on the back on the ground, looking up at the basket and working on changing how high he was releasing the shot. And apparently they were saying that because he was shooting like 5,000 times a day, that he hurt his shoulder in the process. We don't know exactly what he did to injure his shoulder. There's all kinds of speculation. What we do know is he injured it. And the initial diagnosis from the Sixers was scapular imbalance. And it took him several months to improve that issue. And then when he came back, he still wasn't the player that we expected, but the hope was, well, maybe he's still getting better. He wants to get his legs under him. They went through this whole offseason with Drew Hanlon shooting thousands and thousands and thousands of jumpers every day, every week, improving his shot. Drew Hanlon saying this kid is going to be a future all-star. He's going to be a great player. And then the preseason and the regular season comes around, and it's almost like he's afraid to shoot. His shoulder is not better. And there's been conjecture about, his mental health, his physical health, if he's a bust, if he's a fraud, all these different things. And then he separates from Drew Hanlon, the guy he worked with all summer, because the people around him, went to Drew Hanlon and said, he's not better, you didn't fix him. And then in the midst of all this, what does his own teammate say? Markelle Fultz's own teammate, Joel Embiid, says he doesn't think that Fultz has the right people around him. He doesn't approve of the people that he has surrounded himself with. And then what happens? His agent comes out and informs the Sixers that he's removing his client from team activities and they're going to go see more specialists. Totally blindsiding the organization. Fultz even still practiced with the team that day. So this wasn't Fultz's idea. This was his agent lawyer, Raymond Brothers, who, by the way, Brothers used to be the agent of Spencer Dinwiddie of the New Jersey Nets. Spencer fired him. Probably part of it is because of the fact of Brothers handling a Markelle Fultz situation. So Markelle Fultz is now being diagnosed with TOS. And while I understand this is not a common issue for basketball players, it explains a lot of things, because when an individual has a condition like this, when an individual has a neurological issue, when they have an issue that involves nerves and pinches and blood circulation and tingling and gripping and just random bats of pain, you're dealing with something that is hard for certain people to wrap their head around, because it's either something they've never gone through or it's something they don't understand. And many times people criticize, hate, and have a condescending attitude toward what they don't understand. And I've seen it all on Twitter and in social media this week. And I believe, just like the Sixers are, according to Adrian Wojnarowski, ESPN, NBA Inside the Sixers, are optimistic of his recovery and that Fultz is going to begin his rehab in Los Angeles. It looks like it's one of the same people who is a part of the rehab process for other past stars around the league, like the likes of Kobe Bryant and others. So it's not like Fultz is going to some random weirdo that nobody's ever heard of. There's something to be said for the fact that Markelle Fultz was who he was in college, and something happened. And you know what? Maybe when he got injured, however it was, whether it was a motorcycle accident, whether it was training, whether it was working out, whether it was changing his shot, whatever it is, somewhere along the way, he got hurt. He got injured. And he was scared. He was scared to tell people. He was scared to be honest with people about it. And his fear and his anxiety about the whole situation has prolonged this saga. yes, I'm a member of a media. It is my job to question. It is my job to be hyper analytical. It is my job to bring facts and information out there. But I'm worried about Fultz as a human being. That's why I put out on Twitter what I did this week about Fultz. The people who are criticizing him don't understand his situation. They don't understand what it's like to go through what he's going through. Now, I'm not excusing the fact that he and the Sixers have not been totally transparent about this. I'm not excusing the fact that there are more questions and answers through this whole process with Fultz and the Sixers and all the above. I'm not denying any of that. But what I do want to highlight is the fact that you're talking about a young man in Markelle Fultz that, for all intents and purposes, he knows he is still capable of great things. You don't work that hard all summer long. You don't train as hard as he does. You don't have the support of everybody in your life like he does. And you don't still know what you're capable of. I think Fultz still has a productive future in the NBA. But we're going to learn a lot about the rehab that he's going through right now. Because anytime you're dealing with neurological issues, health predicaments that are not, for lack of a better term, naturally tangible. You can't put Fultz under an x-ray and you're going to find this TOS. You're not going to find a neurological issue under a traditional x-ray or a traditional physical examination. These are things that even doctors admit are not always fully understood by them. It's not something they can tangibly grasp all the time. So my concern is for Fultz as a human being, because he doesn't have the right people around him. This rehab is not going to go well. If he doesn't have the right people in his corner, he's not going to get better, not just as a basketball player, but as a human being. My hope is that because the 76ers have been so intensely steadfast in his quarter, in their support of him and in their support of who he is, what they believe he can be, his teammates' belief in him, my hope is that those things are going to lead him on the road back. And I hope in the long run he does learn that he has to have better people around him, because a lot of times in life, the people around us can uplift us or tear us down. And there's a lot of people, and myself included, who question the people who Markelle Fultz has around him in his life. Just because you grew up with someone, just because you spent a lot of time with somebody, just because you've been around a lot of people, doesn't mean they're the right people for you. Just because someone's part of your past doesn't mean they should be part of your future. And that is something Markelle Fultz is going to have to learn. Whether that means cutting ties with certain people, certain associates, whatever it is, I hope that through this whole process he comes out on the other side a better person, wiser, and healthier, because I don't like to see people who work hard and people who are trying to do things the right way fail. If someone is breaking the law, someone is cutting corners, someone is cheating, I hope they fail. I hope they fall on their face and they lose at everything in life. I got no time for scumbags, liars, and people like that. But I've seen Fultz work. I've seen how much time he's putting into it. I've heard on and off the record tons of instances and stories about how talented he is and how good he can be. A neurological pain issue is not something to laugh at. And I know that from personal experience. And I'm telling you, if I was 16 and I didn't tell everybody the truth and I wasn't fully forthright about it, I can only imagine what a 19-year-old kid feels like, who is a first overall pick in the draft, who doesn't have the right people around him to help him get through this situation, who are possibly telling him, "You're right, man, you just got to rub some dirt on it." And who knows how much damage he has done to his health because he has not been handled and treated the right way, because he's been so afraid to be honest with everybody. Topic number 4 in this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast You remember when Venom came out, I went and watched the movie. I reviewed it for all of you here on the Mutant Blitz podcast, and I had a lot of good things to say about it. Well, it looks like I'm not the only one who approves of the movie. The movie has now passed $822 million worldwide in gross profit, with about $211 million of that coming just from domestic box office. That means about $600 million has come from worldwide non-U.S. moviegoers. In China alone, Venom has made $205 million, making the 10th highest grossing movie in the country this year alone in China. The $822 million passes Wonder Woman. It passes Justice League. It passes Spider-Man. In fact, it makes it the second highest grossing origin film for any superhero movie ever. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because Venom, a non-traditional superhero, more of the anti-hero, a movie that was much more of a comic book feel than it was a cinematic thriller. I said in my previous podcast, the movie felt like I was going through a comic book, like I was reading some of the goofy, quirky, campy aspects that are in a comic book, and you walked out and you just had fun. You had fun watching this movie. It was a ride. It was bizarre. It was strange at times, but it was fun. And the reason why I wanted to point this out is because this is the reason why the movie and television industry is going the way it is. When Disney spent billions of dollars to purchase 21st Century Fox Studios, and they're not just getting back the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, they're buying other Fox properties as well. Marvel is telling you, Disney is telling you that they know the future of this business is the movies. It is not in purely television. It is not purely digital, because there is a bevy of people who want to watch movies, whether it's in the theater, whether it's on their devices, whether it is on Hulu and Netflix or whatever their streaming platform is. Movies are the big money thing, not just of today, but of the future. And the more frequently you come out with the movies, you want to have them come out frequently enough that people will keep coming to watch it. And you have Disney coming out with a Mary Poppins Returns movie next month, coming out December 19th. You have Aquaman coming out later this month, which is DC's hope to kind of change the trajectory of their movies that realistically have been struggling, as Justice League and Suicide Squad and Batman v Superman did. Venom takes a character which has a darker edge to it, but makes it something that's entertaining and fun and that people would want to watch. And that's really what the movie industry is trending towards. So when you see stories like Netflix is discontinuing Luke Cage and Daredevil and Iron Fist, part of it is because Disney is not interested in giving away their characters anymore. Disney and Marvel still own the rights to those characters. Netflix doesn't. And Netflix is saying, well, you're actually making more money off of this than we are. So we're not going to have this crazy budget for you to keep making these TV shows. And Marvel and Disney say, fine, we're not going to keep putting out these products, because when they first started with the Netflix shows, the idea was this is another level of universe expansion for Marvel. Well, now you've seen the success of Cloak and Dagger on Freeform. You had The Runaways on Hulu. Disney's talking about coming out with their own streaming platform. We know that they've extended another season for Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on ABC. So we know that Marvel is saying, we know we can do television in other areas. We don't have to need Netflix anymore for our distribution. And on the same token, they're also saying, look, we see that Sony is making a stupid amount of money with a movie with one of our characters. We don't want people to have our characters anymore. We want sole control and possession of all of our characters moving forward. And Sony may never give Marvel back Venom, but their agreement on Spider-Man allows them to keep the Spider-Man and his characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So it's kind of still a win for them. And also it opens up the opportunity for Marvel to be much more open-minded when it comes to what they do with the X-Men and the Fantastic Four when they bring them in to the MCU. So, for example, we know that historically there's 50 years of content for X-Men that they can work off of. You have a plethora of heroes and villains and storylines and concepts to work with these X-Men characters. You don't even ever have to do what they did with the Fox Studio movies. You don't have to rewrite some of those stories. In fact, you can explain them away by saying it was a different universe. Look right now what the CW is going to do with their television universe. They're not dismissing Smallville. They're not dismissing the 1990s Flash TV show. What they're doing is they're saying all of those things happened. They're just a different Earth. They're a different part of the multiverse. Marvel can do the same thing with Spider-Man. They can do the same thing with X-Men and Fantastic Four. Well, those are different universes. But this is our main continuity universe of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And they can take some of the concepts in those stories, and they can take the variety of other stories, and they can bring them all into the MCU and not be afraid that if something is a little bit too campy, if something is a little bit too comic book feel, if a character or a concept maybe is not as theatrical in depth and is much more fictional science fiction storytelling in depth, it doesn't mean people aren't going to come watch it. People are consuming these movies at such a high clip that Venom's success doesn't just encourage Marvel to take more control over their characters, but also encourages Marvel to not be afraid to take certain risks. You've seen them do it with Guardians of the Galaxy. You saw them go into major depth when it came to very little known characters like Star-Lord and Drax and Gamora and Rocket Raccoon. Now you're getting these opportunities again with the Fantastic Four, with the X-Men, and don't be surprised if by 2025, if Marvel introduces a specific X-Men villain that we never got to see fully displayed in Fox's Telling the X-Men, and that is Mr. Sinister, a character that has a lot of darkness to him, and Marvel can tell that story in a way that is not going to scare people off, because they know if people are willing to watch Venom and spend $822 million to go see that movie worldwide, then why not take heroes that are even more popular than Venom against a villain with such a dark edge like a Mr. Sinister? Venom has opened the floodgates of opportunities and has encouraged Marvel to do things that maybe they would not have done 3, 4, and 5 years ago. Topic number 5 on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I did want to take a moment to acknowledge the news that came out this week about Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer has announced that he is retiring from coaching after his final game of coaching Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. And Urban Meyer, while his entire career has been littered with some controversy, while he has been mired in different issues, whether it's his health, whether it's issues with his players, Urban Meyer is trying to walk out on his own terms. And I can appreciate that as someone who knows that when you're dealing with health issues, they can affect how you do everything in your life. And for someone who has cysts on his brain, a 54-year-old man who, when we say he gives every ounce of himself to his coaching profession, to his team, and to his players, we're not exaggerating. There's been times this year that you watch him on the sidelines, he grabs his head, he leans over. He just doesn't look like he's in good physical health because he's poured so much of himself into what he's doing. And Urban Meyer's legacy I want to touch on is going to be a twofold thing. Most people know about the 3 national championships. He's one of only 2 coaches in the modern poll era of college football to win a national championship with 2 different programs. He did it at Florida. He did it at Ohio State. The only other person to do it is Nick Saban. He's done it at Alabama and LSU. Most people know about his conference championships, 3 Big Ten titles, 2 SEC titles, 2 Mountain West titles. Most people are familiar with the fact that Meyer had a load of success at Florida and a ton of success at Ohio State. But the part that I want to highlight is what differentiates Urban Meyer from the other coaches first, and then I want to address the negatives and then kind of wrap it all together. Let's first focus on him as a coach. Urban Meyer's background started in Ohio, and it's only appropriate that it ends in Ohio because after playing at the University of Cincinnati, he became a graduate assistant at Ohio State for a couple of years, gaining his master's degree. He went on to coach all around the country, eventually coming back to get his first head coaching job in Ohio at Bowling Green. It's not that his time at Bowling Green was all that impressive. You know, he only had 2 really head coaching seasons there. He went 8-3 and 9-3. But it opened the opportunity for him to go to Utah for a couple of years. And the perception of him at Utah was, at the time, he was young, he was intense, but he was also just such an intelligent person when it came to coaching offenses. And that's why he was able to do what he did with Alex Smith. He helped turn Alex Smith into the first overall pick in the NFL draft. He had a major bowl victory at the Fiesta Bowl, and that was a major reason why he got hired at Florida to revive the Florida program. And at Florida, he won 2 national championships. Tim Tebow wins a Heisman. He has this incredible amount of success at Florida. And then it comes to an end. His health issues coupled with the situations that are going on at Florida, it was time for him to move on. When the Ohio State job opened up, it only made sense that Urban Meyer would come out of retirement to take that job. A guy who was born in Toledo, Ohio, a guy who was a graduate assistant at Ohio State, a guy who the state of Ohio in football was bred into him for his entire life. And just like he resurrected a downtrodden Florida program, he did the same for Ohio State. And it was more than just winning the national title. He won it with the 3rd-string quarterback. It was more than just the fact that he won the national championship, but he did it by beating Nick Saban again. When he was at Florida, he was the thorn in Nick Saban's side. He was like the one guy that Saban couldn't beat most of the time. Urban Meyer is going to finish with one of the highest winning percentages in all of college football history. His winning percentage is 85.3. 186 wins versus only 32 losses. In his 6 years at Florida, he went 65-15. In his 7 years at Ohio State, he has gone 82-9, pending the Rose Bowl outcome, which I think most people think Ohio State will win because they're just the better team compared to Washington in the Rose Bowl. The amount of success Urban Meyer has had is basically unprecedented, and to do it at not just one major university, but 2. To not just resurrect one football program, but 2. To give validity and purpose and value to a Utah program that was overlooked and helped pave the way for them to join the Pac-12. Florida was on a downward slope in the post-Steve Spurrier era. He resurrected their respectability. In fact, Florida was so good under Urban Meyer, they haven't been able to reach that type of success since he left. Ohio State was something that was very important to him. After the Jim Tressel ouster and all the controversy that went along with the end of his tenure at Ohio State, Urban Meyer comes in there, resurrects that program, the respectability. Him joining Ohio State made the Big Ten respectable again. Him joining Ohio State invigorated different coaches to take Big Ten jobs. Jim Harbaugh going to Michigan, Bill O'Brien going to Penn State, and then later James Franklin going to Penn State, Pat Fitzgerald staying at Northwestern. In the Big Ten, their expansion, they go out and get Nebraska. They have the Big Ten Network, bigger TV contracts for football. The Big Ten was a star again, and it was because of Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer did the same thing to the SEC. He made the concept of the rock star head coach popular again in the SEC. When he joined in 2005, Nick Saban eventually came back to Alabama. You saw coaches wanting not just the SEC because, oh, it's the SEC, but because look at the kind of coach that could be successful in the SEC. Urban Meyer has elevated everywhere he's been. As a conference, as a institution, as a football program, and he elevates his players. Like I said, he won a national championship at Ohio State with the third-string quarterback Cardale Jones. He won his first national championship at Florida with Team Tebow as the backup to Chris Leak. Tebow will later go on to win the Heisman and become arguably the greatest college football player in Florida football history. Now, so that's the good with Urban Meyer. Also part of his legacy is what he left behind. He left a Florida program behind that had a lot of recruiting issues. He left a Florida program behind where, let's be realistic, they were unscrupulous in certain aspects when it came to the type of people they recruited, how they went around recruiting them. When he got to Ohio State, he was condemned by certain other coaches in the Big Ten, specifically by Brett Bielema at Wisconsin, how aggressive he was in his recruiting methods, how there was supposed to be some gentleman's agreement in the Big Ten. Well, Urban Meyer didn't care. Urban Meyer was about getting the best players he could to Ohio State. He wasn't about some gentleman's agreement with the Big Ten and the other coaches. He was trying to go out there to beat them. And at Ohio State, you have the Zach Smith situation. At Ohio State, there's been questions about some of the players' academic standing, just like there was at Florida. Urban Meyer has had some issues along the way. When he left Florida, people were wondering, is he the Larry Brown of college football? Because he was at Bowling Green for 2 years, Utah for 2 years, and Florida for 6. And people figured he would get another job soon enough. And they were right. He only missed one full season of college football. He was back in 2012 coaching Ohio State to a 12-win, no-loss record. Perfect season. But he always leaves a controversy in his wake. Like, why did he have to leave Utah as soon as he did, after already signing a long-term contract? Leaving Florida, conveniently, it was his health problems. Right around the same time, there were certain controversies. Ohio State, some people wonder if the Zachary Smith situation accelerated the process. Now, Urban said at his press conference that he started experiencing health issues last season, the 2017 season. Whether you believe him or not, that's on you. But here's what I believe. I do believe Urban's done. Winning at Ohio State was the pinnacle for him. And him winning at the Rose Bowl, a bowl he's never coached in, a bowl that's very important to anybody who is a coach at Ohio State. Winning the Rose Bowl has historically been one of the most important things at Ohio State, along with beating Michigan each year. And Urban Meyer already filled one end of the bargain. He was undefeated versus Michigan. Now he can walk out with a Rose Bowl. I'm not going to sit here and say that Urban Meyer doesn't deserve his criticism, but I think that when you look at college football history and you're saying that he's in the same category as Pop Warner and Nick Saban, when you put his winning percentage up against some of the best coaches in college football history, when you realize the lineage he came from, he got one of his first jobs from Lou Holtz. The coaches who have come from him, coaches like Gary Anderson, Tom Herman, Dan Mullen, Charlie Strong, Kyle Whittingham at Utah, and now Ryan Day at Ohio State. He's had a major impact on college football, and he comes from a long legacy. But don't get it twisted. The timing of this decision was also very manipulative for another reason that's not being highlighted. Ryan Day, the new Ohio State head coach, the former quarterback at the University of New Hampshire, a guy who is on a skyrocket ascension up the coaching ranks. Ever since he became a graduate assistant at Boston College back in 2003, 2004, before joining Urban Meyer at Florida in 2005, his ascension through the coaching ranks has been insane. And Chip Kelly and Urban Meyer both speak very highly of him. Everyone who's ever worked with him speaks very highly of him. There's a reason why NFL teams were trying to hire him to make him a head coach before Ohio State overpaid him to be their offensive coordinator. And now they're overpaying him to keep him at Ohio State. Because I can guarantee you that if he would have not been made head coach of Ohio State, he probably would have been the Browns head coach. The Tennessee Titans were looking very hard at him before they hired Mike Vrabel. There are other teams around the NFL who would have overpaid to make him either a head coach or their offensive coordinator. There are other college programs that would have overpaid to bring him in. Apparently, there is something unique about his view of offenses, his view of football, that differentiates him from other coaches. And when he gets into an interview room, everyone is sold on him. He is special. Urban Meyer and the Ohio State athletic department understood that if they didn't lock in Ryan Day now, they were going to lose him. And Urban could use his health, that he's dealing with for a couple of years now, his health issues. He could use the fact that of his age and all the other factors to turn around and say, you know what? I'm going to walk away. I'm going to hand the keys over to a guy who's going to continue the success that I have established here at Ohio State. And Ryan Day will do that, and he'll do it in a way that will not be the same as either Urban Meyer or Chip Kelly. He's not going to be as stubborn as Chip Kelly. He's probably not going to be as negligent of issues on his football team as Urban Meyer was. But he'll probably be just as innovative. He's already shown his mettle as a coach. And the fact that NFL teams were going to be calling and other college programs are going to be calling told Ohio State and Urban Meyer, they have to lock this guy in or else. So when I look at Urban Meyer retiring, it's a great legacy, it's a great career, but it's also in some ways a little bit manipulative. Him leaving at this time was very appropriate to lock in Ryan Day. When he left Florida, it was very appropriate for him to get out of there before all of the sanctions and all the issues could come down about the different scandals at Florida. He left Utah a little prematurely. He left Bowling Green a little prematurely. So while he's been an excellent coach and one of the greatest of all time, his legacy is also going to be a little bit murky when it comes to the things outside of the lines of the football field. Off the football field, there's some questions about Urban Meyer. But on the football field, as a coach, as a mentor, I would argue he's one of the best that's ever lived. And anybody who disputes that is being biased. And I'm saying that as someone who is not an Urban Meyer fan and not per se an Ohio State fan. Urban Meyer is one of the greatest coaches of all time. And if he's not in your top 5, then you're being biased against him. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. If you have any thoughts on this week's podcast, you can drop in the comments section below. If you like this podcast, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and catch the podcast with each episode throughout the year as I bring you my thoughts on topics around the sports and comic book, television, and movie world. And I'll catch you next time with more thoughts on sports, comic book, television shows, and movies right here on the Mutant Blitz Podcast. We got more NFL coming up this month. Aquaman comes out in a few weeks. You know we're going to be reviewing that here as well. And of course, the college football bowl season, national championship is set. So we got a lot coming up just this month on the Mutant Blitz Podcast.